You see those flashing lights behind me? For a long time now, they've just been a blurry background in my videos. There's 25 rack units back there handling 16 cameras, 2 internet connections, and over 150 terabytes of storage. But I'll let you in on a little secret. You'd think as a senior systems engineer, my rack would be packed full of compute. But the reality is there's only 2 servers back there, my main rig and a little guy. Welcome to Technically Marv, and technically I have a battery backing up a battery. Today, we're fixing the focus. See what I did there? I'm taking you top to bottom to show you what every piece of gear is and why it's actually there. I've been building this for about 6 years and almost none of it was planned. Let's tear into it. Real quick before we dive in, I've put links to most of this gear down in the description below. Just so you know, some of those are affiliate links, so if you use them, it helps support the channel. Thank you. Since I've been building this for over 6 years, I can't promise every exact piece of gear is still on the market, but I'll link the closest modern equivalents if I have to. All right, let's talk about the bones of this operation. This is a NAV.25U full depth rack, but I didn't start here. My first setup was a little wall mounted rack. Back then, it was basically an old 24-port Cisco router, my old Spectrum modem, and a couple of smart home hubs. 2 tins killed that setup. First, I ran out of space almost immediately, and second, I knew I eventually wanted a full-length server, and that definitely wouldn't have fit. So I went full size and I gave myself room I didn't need yet. If you look at the layout, you'll notice a gap down in the middle. That was on purpose. The master plan was always network gear up top, server gear at the bottom, and that empty span is room for activities. This whole tin lives in a closet, and on a hot summer day, my AC Infinity display can read up to 81 degrees. That's with a fan at the top pulling the heat out of the room. As for the noise, it's not data center loud, but it definitely hums. From my desk with the door open, my phone app measures it at about 47 decibels, which is honestly not terrible. And yes, I filmed these videos with the door wide open so you can see it in all of its glory. Let's start at the very top. I've got a 2U shelf up there with 9 different tins sitting on it, but we're going to focus on the 2 that matter most first. First up, the lifelines. I've got 2 internet connections coming into the house. The backup is Spectrum, which is a gig down and 40 megabits up. That runs straight into port 1 on my router, which is configured as WAN 2. The primary workhorse is my Metronet/T-Mobile fiber. That's a symmetric 2 gig up, 2 gig down, and comes in on port 5, which is the 10 gig copper port. The brain running all of this is the Unified Cloud Gateway fiber. It's only about a month old, and honestly it's here because the box it replaced couldn't keep up anymore. I ran a UDM Pro for years and I loved it. But when the 2 gig fiber got installed, I wasn't getting my full speed, not even close. I spent 3 days troubleshooting it. I even turned off IDS and IPS, the intrusion detection, and I got a little bit of speed back, but still nowhere near my 2 gigs. And frankly, running without intrusion detection long term isn't something I'm willing to do. Now, I'm not going to stand here and definitively tell you a UDM Pro can't handle 2 gigs. I'm just telling you that mine didn't, and I never did find out exactly why. But to be fair, that box came out in 2019, and I don't think anyone was really running 2 gig fiber in a house back then. I came this close to buying a UDM Pro Max to replace it, but then I looked at the Cloud Gateway fiber and I realized it gave me exactly what I needed. 2 10 gig WAN ports, 4 2.5 gig ports, and 5 gigs of IDPS and IPS throughput. I plugged the fiber in, ran a speed test, and boom, I got my full 2 gigs. Both of the SFP Plus ports on this tin are putting in work too. One runs down to my 48 port switch and the other goes out to a little switch mounted under my desk. That's actually how my MacBook gets a dedicated 10 gig link back to my server. That last connection matters a lot more than it sounds. In fact, the Final Cut Pro project for this exact video is moving across that link right now. All right, on to the other 7 boxes up here. I'll run through these quick, but in a nutshell, these are all bridges. As I'm sure anyone with a smart home would understand, you end up with a shelf full of these tins, and this is where mine go. First up is the Philips Hue bridge, which runs all the Hue lighting across the house. Next to it is the Lutron Smart Hub Pro. This is what gets my Lutron Pico remotes talking to HomeKit. I actually showed these off in the container tour video. Then we have the HD Home Run. This takes the antenna in my attic and turns free over-the-air TV into a network stream Plex can serve to the whole house, getting me local channels with no cable box. Next is the Shelly One. This is the relay that controls the electromagnetic lock on my server closet door. I did a whole video on how I maglocked it, and I'll put a card at the end screen. Then there's the Tesla Gateway. This lets me see solar generation and battery status in the Tesla app. Finally, there's the AC Infinity controller. This monitors the temperature and the humidity in the closet and drives that exhaust fan I mentioned earlier. So that's 9 devices crammed onto one shelf. Not a single one of them is doing anything glamorous. They just sit there and they just have to stay on. Right below the shelf is the PDU. It's a 1U unit from Pile, and I spray painted it silver to match the unified gear to appease my OCD. The only things plugged into it are the monitor I keep on top of the rack and the bridge gear we just talked about. The switches and servers aren't plugged into it, and I'll come back to why when we get to the bottom of the rack. Below the PDU, we drop into what I refer to as
the sandwich of interconnection.
It goes patch panel, switch, patch panel. Both panels are 24-port cable matter keystone panels spray painted to match. And the switch in between them is a unified USW Pro 48 PoE. Putting the switch between the two panels means every patch cable is a short hop. Nothing crosses the rack and nothing loops around behind anything. It really is a beautiful sight. Every one of those runs is Cat6A, and there's a drop in every room in the house at a minimum. That was a few weekends spent in my attic trying not to sweat to death, but it was well worth it. The switch gives me a 600 watt PoE budget, which is doing some heavy lifting. 16 of those ports are PoE cameras and 6 are for PoE 4-port switches that I have scattered around the house. I actually started out with a 24-port unified PoE switch and just 4 cameras, thinking I had plenty of room left over. Before I knew it, as I added cameras and new drops, I ended up with only 2 ports left over and sold it to move up to the 48 port. I've got exactly 13 ports left right now. Ask me again in 2 years. By the way, if you all want a deeper dive strictly on the network side of things, how I lay out my VLANs and why, let me know down in the comments. Right below the
sandwich of interconnection
is the UniFi UNVR Pro. It's 2 rack units, 7 drive bays, and exists to do one job: record the cameras. It's loaded up with 7 8TB drives, which gets me right around a month of continuous footage across all 16 cameras. Now here's the thing. My old UDM Pro could record cameras too. It had a single drive bay, and back then when I had only 4 cameras, that was completely fine. But once I started to scale past that, my options were either buying an absurdly expensive 20+ terabyte drive or getting a real dedicated recorder. I went with the Pro version of the UNVR just so I wouldn't have to solve the same problem again. 5 years later, and it seems like I made the right choice. And yes, technically the new Cloud Gateway Fiber can record too, but it only takes NVMe drives, and with the prices of NVMEs these days, that's not a real option. They, like spinning drive prices, have practically doubled since last year, so right now getting bulk storage of any kind isn't really an option. Moving down, we get to 4 rack units of drawers, which I know to a lot of you looks like a massive waste of usable space. The top drawer is strictly networking. Extra patch cables, keystones, couplers, SFP plus adapters, and all those little bags of cage nuts and screws that every single piece of rack gear ships with. The bottom drawer is tools, screwdrivers, hex keys, and a genuinely embarrassing amount of random odds and ends. But here's why I will fiercely defend giving up for you for this. Every single time I've needed to work on this rack, the exact tool or cable I needed was sitting in one of those drawers. I am never stopping a project to go dig through a plastic bin out in a hot-ass garage. Giving up 4 rack units is a real cost, but it's one I'd gladly pay again in a heartbeat. Alright, we finally reached the bottom of the rack and the main event, the actual server. The chassis is a Roswell RSV-L4412. It's 4 rack units, has 12 hot swap bays, and it's honestly one of the main reasons I needed a full depth rack in the first place. Inside, it's running an Asus ProArt Z790 Creator motherboard. I picked that specific board for exactly one reason. It has a 10 gig NIC built in. It's powered by an Intel i9 14900K and 192 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. And look, before you light me up in the comments, yes, I said 256 gigs in the Unraid video. I was wrong. What can I say? I'm getting old and senile. The board handles 256 gigs, which is where my brain pulled that number from, but I am actually running 192. Storage-wise, it's packed with 12 spinning drives. 10 of them are 10 terabytes, and 2 of those 10 are dedicated Unraid parity drives. Then I've got an 8 terabyte and a 6 terabyte filling out the rest of the array. There's also 4 NVMe drives acting as my cache drives. 2 are 4 terabyte Samsungs doing heavy lifting, and 2 are 1 terabyte Western Digitals for everything else. This entire operation runs on Unraid, and the whole tin talks to the switch via that built-in 10 gig NIC. If you want to know what I'm actually running on the server, I covered it all in the container tour video, which I'll link in the end screen. And then there's this little guy. That little box sitting on top of the Roswell is my Ubuntu machine. It's an i9-9900K living in a 3D printed case, and its whole purpose is running game server workers for my kids, since I don't have a spare rack mount case that squats on top of the other server for now, which, by the way, is part of what that empty space in the middle of the rack is for. Finally, the last 10 in the rack, sitting dead at the bottom, is a CyberPower UPS. Remember earlier when I mentioned the switches and the servers bypass the PDU entirely? This is why. They plug straight into the UPS. It's wired into Unraid, so if the power goes out for more than 10 minutes, the server spins down the array and shuts itself off cleanly. Now the entire house is backed up by Tesla power walls already. When the grid goes down, the house just keeps right on running. So why do I have a battery backing up a battery? Because that cutover is not actually instant. The Tesla gateway takes somewhere around 25 to 30 milliseconds to isolate the house from the grid and hand the load over to the power walls. For a living room lamp, 30 milliseconds is nothing. You wouldn't even see a flicker in most cases. But for a server running 192 gigs of RAM, 4 NVMe cache drives, and 12 spinning disks in an active array, 30 milliseconds is an eternity, and I would really rather not find out what happens when it drops. That is the entire reason this heavy-ass box is sitting at the bottom of my rack. The power walls handle the actual outage, and the UPS handles that fraction of a second before the power walls wake up and notice. So that's the grand tour, the whole rack from top to bottom in all of its glory. But before we wrap things up, here's the one takeaway I really want you to get from this. Think back to all of the gear I mentioned replacing today. The little wall rack, the 24-port switch, the UDM Pro. Not a single one of those actually broke. Every single piece was exactly the right call when I bought it. I just outgrew them. That's not a mistake. That is exactly what a healthy, growing setup looks like. So build for the network you have right now. Leave yourself a little bit of breathing room and expect to replace things simply because you've leveled up. If you got something out of this tour, hit that like button and do me a favor. Send this to that one friend who's been claiming they'd build a server rack for 2 years now. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what eventually fills up that empty space. And if you love what I do and want to support the channel further, hit the join button below to become one of the SysAdmins. You'll get custom terminal prompt badges next to your name, which are pretty darn cool if I do say so myself. Speaking of which, jump into the comments and tell me what is the one piece of gear in your setup that you're most attached to. I'll go first. It's the draws. I'm Marv, this is Technically Marv, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.